the next generation, myself and my cousins, as we talk and compare, they actually accuse my grandparents, my mother's parents, of being not emotionally expressive.
Interesting.
Exact opposite. In other words, they say, you never express. Any suffering, you suffered in silence. Everything was internal. So I have to say, there is two sides to it. The one beautiful side, exactly as we're describing, you just live. And you don't have to make a drama for every
narrative. Everything that happens has to be like a
whole thing. And therefore, there's a confidence that's instilled in you from your parents, which I definitely got from my parents. And my mother's describing how she got it from her parents. And my father for sure got it from his parents because he was just that way. My father was like the most the person most comfortable in his skin of anyone I know. Now, I want to know how many people are comfortable in their skin today.
No, that's what I'm trying.
I grew up in a home in Stalin's communist Soviet Union, who was like Hitler, Yamach Shemai.
Correct.
And with fear, and yet he was completely comfortable in his own skin.
Meaning where his own skin could have landed him in jail.
Exactly. But the bottom line is, I think that the key was Amunah for them. Amunah, faith in God, was not a word. It wasn't a workshop. It wasn't even Shar B'tachin from Chavos Alavavos. Not to take away from that. It was what they lived. They breathed. Oxygen and Amunah was the same thing for them.
So I want to understand, because you said a very important point, which is about self-consciousness and sharing. I'm curious for you. Did you grow up in a home where your parents shared about their inner lives? Did you talk about your inner lives with your children? Do you think when he said that, when the cousins get together, the siblings get together, they talk about it's a generation that was not so self-expressive. Do you think there's truth to that, or you think, what are you talking about?
No, I know what the next generation, how they were taught. But I spoke to my children and we spoke about things. But again, we didn't have things that were like so bothering us and challenging. I don't know, it's just that maybe we were so naive and innocent.
Let me say it from my perspective. No, my parents and my grandparents as well, they didn't speak about their personal experiences. You could not get my father, you couldn't get my grandparents or my mother to talk about anything that really bothered them. So, on one hand, you could say the impression is that either they were not introspective and thinking about it, or on the contrary, they lived their lives and those things were not that significant to them. And so in that sense, it's a tremendous contrast. Today, everybody's talking about everything, and sometimes too much.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, but I will say this. So I think to myself, and I would ask my mother this question, let's talk about real trauma, not, imagined trauma.
Yeah.
Where somebody said something the wrong way to someone and they have to go to therapy about, But let's talk real trauma, child molestation.
Sure.
But that happened in the last generation or two generations ago. And what happened if a child was God forbid, raped? I mean, I hope I'm allowed to say this on this program.
No.
Or there was some real, someone was murdered. How was it dealt with? Did people talk about it or not? And I'm not saying they didn't deal with it. Maybe they dealt completely different way. But we could probably never engage that generation to talk about these things. If I asked that to my grandparents, and I knew my grandparents, my mother's parents, they just wouldn't talk. They wouldn't say no comment. It just would be a non-topic. So I wonder if something like that really happened. Was it that they were so healthy in so many other areas that this became insignificant? And what happens if it happened to your own child? Did you just say, let's move on and just believe in Hashem and everything? And remember, I'm not necessarily talking about from anti-Semites or from outside. Let's say something in the community. Someone did something to someone inappropriate. And I'm sure that there were, we do have Le Signov, Le Sirtzach, we know that
we don't murder,
Yetzer Hara wasn't born in the 20th century. So I'd love to hear my mother respond to that.
Is that something, meaning, this is what I'm essentially trying to get at, is that...
if something actually like that happened, would have been ever talked about, would have been addressed, would have been
I don't
ignored?
even know, because we didn't even know about children that were born, for example, Down syndrome.
Yeah.
I think people were not open, obviously. They were embarrassed to admit that they had a Down syndrome, but because we never heard of that there's such a thing as a Down syndrome child.
But were there any handicapped children in your community, like friends or anybody? You
Not
found?
that I'm thinking to it. We had a girl who was slow and stuff like that. So everybody like treated her a little more nicely and stuff like that. But there wasn't anything that I don't remember anybody also coming from school and saying, I'm not going to school tomorrow.
But what about, do you remember a kid who had like a parent who died or got put in jail or something, like it happened close to your community? Does that child go to school the next day? Like their parents got
No,
taken?
the child did not go to school that day, and everybody was really very supportive of the family.
Would word spread in the community? Like it was like now, there's always, WhatsApp groups and how, so-and-so's getting divorced. So-and-so is, you heard this happen, you heard that
Or a little
happened.
child got, God forbid, cancer. Or
Yeah.
The communication was not like now, where in one instant everybody knows everything. You spoke to your neighbors, but you didn't speak to somebody out of town.
But
so
do you
easily.
remember an incident that it happened in the community and there was like a collective gasp? Like, oh, boy, I can't believe it.
Because again,
I think
there
the
wasn't
bar
that kind
was
of
all-
communication, instant communication. For example, something happened to a neighbor. We had this next door neighbor who had this girl that was slightly challenged. So all of us on the block were very supportive. But I can't say that I spoke to somebody, or my friends I spoke to, but I wouldn't speak to somebody on the next block or in the next. Now it's a whole different story. Come to shul, everybody knows everything.
So this is what I want to try to understand and hear each of your perspectives on. And we could start with you. What do you attribute this generational change to in the way that we share and speak about our own emotional life? Are we more in touch emotionally? Do we just have more avenues for communication, so we got to share something? What do you look at when you look at the difference? Is it that we just don't have the faith of previous generations? I hope that's not the answer. I think people
I think it's a combination of several factors, not necessarily in order of priority, but I think one key difference is a change in the whole environment. Today we're free. We don't have oppressors. We're not hiding. And I think freedom, with all its blessings, also creates a lot of apathy, a lot of free time, and a lot of sense of entitlement. That didn't exist in that generation. There was no sense of entitlement. Every second was accounted for. Not that they were perfect, but it was like you felt the pressure. Anti-Semitism was around you, even if you didn't experience it. But today, the sense of entitlement, the amount of time people have, the leisure, there was no leisure. Today you could sit and watch television for 6 hours or go on your phone. That didn't exist. And I think that what we call, boy reik ein bei mayim, it's an empty pit. So what happens when there's a vacuum? Nachashim v'akravim yesh boi. All the scorpions and the
snakes come
the
in
demons.
and fill it up.
Today, and I deal with many people. I see this. People have so many demons in their minds, some real, some imagined, but they have the time to think about it. But when you're running for your life, and I'm just putting myself in the shoes of my grandparents, you have to bring up 8, 9 children. I mean, how many children did they have in Gruzia? 5?
5.
5.
And then,
And your life is, make sure my children are going to be from Jews in a difficult world. Give them strong emunah, and that's your main priority. Not billions of dollars. You're not going for any Pesach programs. You're not traveling to Israel because you're in a bad mood. And moods don't make a difference for that matter. The crystallized focus on those values really almost eliminates so many of the negative things. So our blessing has become our, I don't want to say curse.
No,
So
but
I
that
think
is what
that's
it
one
is.
major difference.
There's existential boredom.
There's a whole different reality. I would love to hear from my mother if she remembers the shift from that consciousness and when coming to America. Because the Rebbe actually talked about it. The Rebbe would say that there's a beautiful concept. The Baal Shem Tov, everyone knows the song Tzama L'cha Nafshi, the verse.
The Rebbe sings it so beautifully.
Yeah, Tzama L'cha Nafshi, my heart is thirsty, my soul is thirsty. Be'eretz sea of Oyef, I'm in a parched, arid land, bli moyim, without water. And then the end is a very interesting end to that verse. Kein ba'kodesh chazisicha. What does that mean? Kein ba'kodesh chazisicha literally
Also
means
in holiness.
also in holiness I shall see you. But what's the also? You're just talking about a very
Being
negative
thirsty
situation.
and parched and
right.
you're looking.
So what's
and
the
you're-
also?
Okay.
So the Baal Shem Tov interprets Cain, read it halavai. Halavai. That even b'kodesh, when I don't have all these challenges, when I'm not thirsty and I'm sated and I'm living in
I have freedom and
I should have the same passion.
the same thirst,
And the
even
same
when I have
passion
access.
and Mesiras Nefesh, just as when I was dying from thirst. So in other words, in the Soviet Union and in very difficult circumstances, now nobody wants to return the clock back, obviously, but there was a certain pure sincerity because it was all about surviving as a Jew. And much of that could be lost easily when you came to the United States or to other free countries because now you don't have to fight for anything.
So
And when you don't have to fight, you ask an average American, boy or girl, Jew or not Jew, what do you stand for? What are you ready to die for? You asked that question to my mother as a child. Everyone knew what they died for Yiddishkeit, for God.
And they had to
for
really
Hashem.
be ready. It
And,
wasn't
and,
just
and for my
words.
family and for the next generation. Today, what am I ready to die for? Maybe that my football team should win the Super Bowl, or I should be able to go on a vacation, So I see this all the time. When COVID came around, for example, and suddenly people's comfort zones and security blankets were stripped, that suddenly, like Warren Buffett says, until the tide is out, you don't know who's been
You
swimming
don't know
naked.
who's wearing a bathing suit.
You don't know who's been
Exactly.
swimming naked. Suddenly
Yeah.
you're naked because you can't run to your local restaurant or your comfortable comfort zones. I think that is a major difference, which also tells us what's needed today. Because you need to find a way. You can't just say...
So I want to come back to today.
Yeah, we'll get back to... But that, I think, is one major difference. And as a result, yes, you need deeper resources to strengthen that amunah, because today it's called mitzvah sanoshim lamada. Culturally,
You're born into it.
Yeah, you're born
It's-
to Judaism.
it's like a moving sidewalk,
My
I
mother
compare
said
it
Moda
sometimes.
Ani in the morning. That was their biggest antidote and preventive medicine to the challenges of their time. Today you say Moda Ani. Yeah,
I'm grateful.
It's
Great,
it's
good.
cultural and so on.
Yeah.
Shabbos for them was a true oasis because it was like a day of real menucha, real calm.
Yeah.
Today Shabbos, okay, what shalom am I going to eat and which kiddush am I
Shalom
going?
Zacher.
So I want to jump into that
Yeah.
because you brought up a few things that just triggered my memory. As far as Shabbos, my father wrote, I found some pieces of writing of my father that he never shared. And he wrote that he lived in Poltava, that's at the Ukraine. And he said on Shabbos, you could feel Shabbos in the street.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so what I wanted to jump in is that what he was saying about freedom and Russia. So in Russia, no freedom. We're constantly on Mesiras Nefesh. You're constantly fighting for
Sacrificing
something.
constantly.
You are never just apathetic.
Never
It's
complacent, yeah.
Yeah, never apathetic. And then you come to America, and there's freedom. You don't have to fight for Shabbos candles. You don't have to fight for kashrus. You don't have to fight for covering your hair, to go to the mikveh. You don't have to go to a frozen well to go to the mikveh. You don't have to fight for anything.